Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. Every project has its own journey, and today I want to share the making of my black pearl project with you. This project began several years ago. I was intrigued by the work of the wonderful Japanese quilter Yoko Sato, and I had begun collecting Japanese taupe fabrics as a result. I loved their muted tones, and I hoped to create something inspired by Ms. Sato. My idea was to find a way to create a project that combined English paper piecing and crazy quilting. After creating several sketches of ideas, I chose one and pasted it in my project planner as my primary inspiration. A selection of fabrics was chosen in a palette of slate blues and light taupe fabrics. I started off by making 2 strips of 1-inch faux paper piecing squares. That gave me the confidence to try the hexagons, and so I started making them. I wasn't exactly certain of the final design, so I made lots. Eventually, I decided on a design of 3 hexagon flowers at each end in shades of lighter blue, surrounded by background hexagons in shades of dark taupe and brown. Then it was time to think about the crazy quilted center. I drew up a full-size template for it, and I'm not sure why, but I ended up not using the pattern I made, and the end result was a much rounder shape rather than the longer oval I had originally envisioned. Even though it was different from my original design, it all worked out. I took this project to a couple of crazy quilt retreats where I pieced together the hexagons, then I chose an assortment of coordinating threads. In the end, I stitched all the seams using just 1 thread. Mother of pearl buttons are one of my favorite embellishments, and I had acquired a nice selection of dark mother of pearl buttons over the years that I wanted to use on this project. They blended beautifully with the slatey blue fabrics. Choosing the black mother of pearl buttons led me to call this piece Black Pearl. Once the seams were stitched, I decided on where the buttons would go, took a photo, and then grouped the buttons by seam and packaged them up for the journey home from the retreat. Once home, I sewed the buttons in place. Then I got stuck. I wasn't happy with how it was turning out, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it or what to do next on it. So I packed it away and put it in my work-in-progress basket. Then, 4 years later, I pulled it out to look at it. This is one of the few projects I've ever done where I've really planned it out in advance. And I think in some ways that was part of the problem I had with it. I got partway through and I thought the buttons were too heavy. Do I need to remove them? Should I replace them? I'm so glad that I chose not to. I think the thing that pulled this piece together was when I decided to put the buttons out here in the hexagon flowers, and that just pulled the center through into the outer portion. I had already stitched strips of squares from the same fabrics that I had used in the hexagons. Putting that on the end pulled it together. The other thing I've been struggling with is how to bind this one. It couldn't be just an open edge. It just didn't work. At first, I was going to use this fabric because it's got blue in it. It's the same blues as in the other fabrics. But when I did that, I liked the piece even less. I went hunting through my stash of stuff and found this hand-dyed cotton. I've pinned that around the edge to get a feel for it, and I'm really happy with that one. After being stuck on it for so many years, I'm really pleased with where this one is going finally. Now that I've had some time away from it and can re-look at it, I love the mix of crazy quilting, the English paper piecing with the hexagons, the faux paper piecing on the ends, and the fact that there's going to be a little traditional quilting in this as well. I had stitched these long pieces. They're with that faux paper piecing method that I love to do. They're ready to be sewn onto the ends. I have taken the muslin and trimmed it to match the piece except on the ends. But on the border here, I have folded under about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to be stitching these pieces on. They are too long. And so I need to remove 1 square from both of these so that it will fit. I'm just going to should just pull right apart. Very good. Okay, so there's 1. So there we have the newly adjusted strips. These were stitched together holding it like so and whip stitching. That's the way I'm going to attach it to this folded edge. So I'm not going to attach it to the muslin, but we're going to center it on here. I want to leave about 1/2 inch at each end. And I'm just going to pin this muslin back because I can just foresee that if I don't pin it out of my way, I'm going to end up stitching through it. This is the center, and the center of that should line up with the center there. I don't need to pin too often, but I want to make sure I'm pinning often enough that it's going to line up where I need it to. I think that will do on that side. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it right now on the other side. To stitch that on, I'm going to use 2 strands. We're just going to whip stitch this on. Well, hi! That's the way he likes to sit. Stitching with Sweet Pin. If I'm stitching or at the computer, he has to be here in my arms, don't you, buddy? I finished stitching on this little band. Now I'm just going to finger press it out. You just sort of have to pull these to sort of set the seam. So there's that. So I'm going to unpin that muslin. I'm going to just pin these down where I want it to go. The next thing I want to do is to quilt some of this here. I cut a piece of this vintage flannel that I have. It's a nice weight. It's going to make a great interlining. There's no batting. We're just using the flannel. And that's what I'm going to quilt through. So the quilting is not going to come all the way through to the backing. My intent is not to do any quilting in this area here, but I do want to hold it down very stable. I'm going to pin it pretty frequently. I have my threads here. I'd like to use something a little bit thicker. I'm leaning to this one. My plan is to just go around the outside of the flower. I may go around this inner patch. These are not perfect little hand quilting stitches by any means, nor do I want them to pull too tight. And so I'll try to be as consistent as I can with each petal as we go here. Oh, do you see what I just did? I'm stitching out into the border. Well, I'm back today working on my black pearl project. The last time around, I quilted around the flowers. Today, I'm working on stitching in the border. I'm just going to go straight along here, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to go around the outside. So I have my thimble. I've got my needle threaded with a variety of Karen Wildflowers threads, so it's a pretty dark color. I played with several, and this was the one I liked best. I tried that one and it was too light, and I think that's what I ended up doing the flowers with. I'm just doing a very simple running stitch through here. There, I'm just going to do a little back stitch at the end. Give that a tug, make sure the stitches are set. Looks pretty good on the back. I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going a little less than 1/4 inch out, and so we're going to start just on this long edge and do exactly the same as I was doing in the other side. So just stitching along this long edge. And so now I'm just going to go around these hexagons in the same way. And I just need to ensure that my stitching ends coming straight out from either the dip or the point, so that the stitching turns as sharply as the edges of the hexagons. It's pretty light stitching here, but you can see on the back. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm just going to keep stitching around and I will be back. I've quilted all the way around this outer edge now, as well as the flowers. Do I want to do anything in here, or can I call it good? I do feel like this needs tightened down. Well, sometimes the best way to figure something out is to just go ahead and try it. So let's see what it looks like if I do some stitching right along here. I think I'm going to stick with that same dark thread. So what do you think? I think it just sort of finishes that area off. I don't think I need anything up here. I like the way, when I look at this, that it sort of holds this in place. When you look at it from a distance, like you see through the camera lens here, it's really not that noticeable. And yet, if you can see the difference between this side and this side, it sets it down somehow. So I'm really happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and do this side. And then I think it's time to put the backing on and then get it bound. I have finished the quilting on both sides here. This section here is so heavy with all the buttons. I am going to do just a little bit of tack stitching in here. Maybe even tuck a couple around a couple of these heavier buttons. I think that's going to help hold it down to the center. This is actually a silk, but the color just blends right in. I'm just going to do this little bit underneath some of these big buttons. I'm just going around and putting a few simple little tacks in there to hold that. And I wasn't going to do this at first, but the more I've thought about it, it's just you never know how a piece is going to be used. And if I end up not holding on to this or it goes to somebody else, I would just like it to be good and stable. I'm really just doing this teeny tiny back stitch just over a thread or two in the background. Just sort of zigzag our way around this block. And that thread matches so well, I don't think you can even see those little teeny tiny stitches in there. So I'll finish that and then we'll go square it off, get the backing added, and cut our binding, and then it'll be time to put it all together. Now I'm really looking forward to getting this done. So now I have that all tacked down. So there's tacking in the seams around most of the back. And I don't know if you can tell here, but I feel like it really makes a difference, that it really has set it down onto that backing. It's no longer loose and poofy. And that combined with this stitching here and around the exterior has really finished off this piece. So I am now in my kitchen, and I'll be honest with you, the light is not nearly as good in here. It doesn't help that Mr. Mushu thinks he needs to be here as well. I need to decide how wide I want my binding and then where my seam line is going to be. I need to square from corner to corner here. And as I'm looking at this, while it's not perfect, it's pretty close along here. So I think we're going to fudge just a wee bit and square on this line here. So I need to think from here, what do I want this binding to go? So if I'm going to put a 1/2 inch binding on it, I probably need to come out 1/2 inch from there. So I need to come out this mark here. So the next thing I want to do is flip this around. And we're going to do the same here. I've got to look where our corners are, how it lines up to this. Where are we at here? So we're going to come out. We're going to go right in there. So now we should be straight. We know my seam is from roughly corner to corner, or 1/2 inch here. I want to come out 1/2 inch on these outer ends as well. But let's just double check and see where we're at measurement wise. So we're about 13.5 here, and we're 13.5 here. So we're staying pretty square here. So now I'm going to trim these ends. So I have 1/2 inch on that end. And I'm just sort of lining up against one end here. And I'm going out 1/2 inch from my finished edge here. And there'll be a little variation because those squares vary slightly. I'm taking that off. All right, so that is square. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to take our backing fabric . That backing is going to be exactly the same size, hopefully. Okay, now I should be able to do this edge. And that should be backing fabric that fits that perfectly. Now I probably will add my quilt label at the very end of this project. Just one last little press there. I'm actually going to take these pins that are already in here and let's pin this down. Okay, so that is ready to go. So let's work on this binding. I'm going to give this a brief iron, give this a spritz with some water. And this cotton has kind of a natural wrinkliness to it, which is fine, but I went for color on this one because I found that those taupe fabrics are really hard to match color with. And this was the only one I found that I really liked with it. And rather than working with that long length, I'm going to fold it in half. Kitty, you're in the way. So I'm square on this end and this end, and I'm just going to cut that end off and get rid of that. I want a 1/2 inch binding. So I need 1 inch that's going to show front and back, plus whatever my seam allowance is. Now we've cut so I have a 1/2 inch of seam allowance, and it will be easiest if I maintain that. So I'm going to cut. I always feel like when you fold it, it takes up a little bit of room. Oh, kitty, and you wonder why everything is covered in kitty hair. We're going to go 2 1/4. I think that's where I feel comfortable going. There's 1 and 2. I did not take the time to measure my project ahead of time. Let's see what we need. So that's 27 and we're 13 1/2. So some quick math. 27 plus 13 is 40 inches. I cut my binding 2 1/4 inches wide, and I've got 50 inches of length here. Now I'm going to lose a couple because I did this where I stitched corner to corner, and when I fold it out, it'll remain straight. So I'm just going to trim off that extra. I'm going to iron this in half. So I'm just matching my edges and ironing. And so this is on the straight grain. I have roughly 50 inches of binding, so there's plenty here. And so I've got a good 10 inches extra. I could have done this so that I actually sewed this and then folded it over and over that way. But I feel like it makes it bulky. And so now that I've folded that to the middle, I'm just going to bring this back. And I'm just going to do one edge at a time. I don't want it quite all the way to the center, but it's going to be pretty close. And I'm just going to do that all the way down, and then I'm going to repeat on the other side, and so I'll have a double fold bias. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to fold it in half and redo that fold. So the next step is we're going to take this into the sewing machine, and I'm going to get this stitched onto the runner. I know this is not super easy to see here. Let me show you what I'm going to do. It'd be really easy to make a mistake here. I need to fold this back. And I'm going to fold back that corner here as well. So the reason I'm doing this is because I want to hand sew to this binding, and I need it out of my way. We're going to start on the back. You're going to say, oh, the back's going to look nice and neat and the front won't look neat. It will, trust me. We're going to start a few inches away because I need that room to make my invisible or diagonal binding. I use a magic binding technique that I learned from Missouri Star Quilt Company. They have a fabulous tutorial on it. Almost every time I do this, I watch their tutorial. What I'm trying to do is I'm going to stitch right in the fold. I'm lining that edge up with the edge of the piece. I want to come to within 1/2 inch of the end, and I'm going to just mark that with my pin. And then I'm going to stitch at a 45-degree angle off the end. So we're going to fold that right along there, like so. And then I'm going to come back, and now we're going to stitch again, right in that ditch. And I'm feeling, because I want to miss where I tucked my faux paper pieced edge away. I am completely using the folds in the binding for this as my seam guide. Now, if you weren't stitching down to something on the front like I am, then you would be stitching this from the front. But because I'm going to be hand stitching onto that visible hand-stitched piece, I need to do it from the back. I'm going to go 45 degrees off the end, trim the threads, but not the binding. I'm going to fold it back so I get that nice 45 degree, then come back, and I'm ready to stitch again. I need to have a little space here, so I'm going to bring it up and let's just fix it right there. I'm going to trim off all my loose ends here. We have our binding out, and we're going to overlap these two pieces the same width as the binding. So there's that, and we did 2 1/4, so I'm going to just snip that there. I'm only going to trim one of them, so I'm trimming the one on top and cutting it for 2 1/4. And now I'm going to take those, I always have to think about this, and we're going to go diagonal across. We're going to go this way, and always double check and make sure it's all going to line up with there, and we're going to go across this way. So my right sides are together. All those buttons are noisy. And we're just going to stitch corner to corner here. So I want to check my other corner, make sure everything is folded out flat. So take your time. On a small piece like this, I have kind of not given myself much room for error. If I was doing a big piece, I'd leave myself a lot more length here to make sure I got it all nice and even. Let's take a look here. So, if this came out right, now my binding is solid all the way along here. I'm going to trim this edge. Now, technically, I probably ought to take and do that at the iron. I'm going to finger press this. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to stitch right over that. Still stitching right in that fold. Alright, now we're fixed. I'm going to trim that off. So now what happens is when we fold it, look how nice and neat of a corner we get there. That's why you really would like to have that on top, but I'll be able to do much the same here on the bottom. When we come around here, I'm going to do those corners much the same way. We're going to go up straight And then we're going to come in, but we're going to bring it in to meet here, and we'll pin those here as we go. But before I do any of that, I'm going to take it to the iron, and we're going to iron this outward so that it's a little easier to handle. I have this pressed out. I'm just going to trim off maybe 1/8 of an inch, just so I've got a slight more amount of space for turning. So I probably could have gone with a 2.5 inch binding. So we'll just do that quick trim on each edge here. I don't want to have a ridge or ball of stuff along the edge. Now I have my pins, and I am going to pin this. Let's go along this long edge, and I'm just going to pin it right along the edge. I want it right over that line of the stitching that I've done. That will help me make sure that it's staying relatively straight. There's my corner. So I'm going to pin my corner. I'm not going to worry about pinning the little square to it. This one I'm meeting this edge, or if that edge sticks out, I'll go over it ever so slightly. So it may not, as I pin, match up perfectly even. And the hand stitching always allows you a little bit more room to even things out. But all this work right here will make the hand stitching of this edge so much easier. I won't have to worry about holding and adjusting as I go. Alright, I think we're ready to begin hand stitching. So I'm going to be using this blue thread that matches this pretty well. It's the closest that I have. And I've got my needle, and I definitely want my thimble on this one. I'm not going to start in the corner. I want to start somewhere along one of these long straightaways. And I'm going to come up underneath the edge, bring that out, and come along. And I'm just going to do a bit of a blind hem stitch. And my stitches are going to be roughly 1/8 of an inch long. I'm just picking up barely a thread or two on the edge of the binding. I'm going through the top layers, but not the backing. I'm avoiding the backing. I need to keep my pin cushion handy. And this is the most boring stitching to watch, so I'm just going to stitch, and when I get to a corner, I'll show you how I deal with the corners. You can see it looks really nice, and it looks just as nice on the back. So I'm going to be really happy with this. I am down here at the corner. I'm going to be doing a much smaller stitch, pulling these together. Up to this point I've been going a little over 1/8 of an inch, and now I'm going 1/8 of an inch or less, because I want them to be nice and secure. I'm not as concerned if they show. And now I'm going to pull that pin out where my corner is. I'm up through both pieces of fabric there. I'm not sure if you can see that. And before I go down this way, I'm going to stitch the edge of this corner. And we're going to whip stitch it all the way out to the corner. And I'm trying to take care not to go through the back side. And now, got that. I'm just going to come back down and just weave my way through the fabric back down to where I started. And that should be pretty invisible here. I'm going to come up on the underside, and now we're going to stitch across that whole way, doing that tiny, nearly hidden whip stitch. I do find these dark colors hard to see exactly where I'm at. I'm trying to be careful. Got good lights. And again, I'm really trying to pick up just a couple of threads in that binding. I'm going down so that the back side of the stitch is completely hidden underneath. But you can see how nice that's looking. I'm going to do each corner the same way, and I'll be back when I'm done. I finished stitching on the binding, and I'm pretty happy with it. You can tell, especially on the ends here, especially right over here, that they weren't completely straight, and I had to do a little bit of easing in. there we have the whole piece finished. There's one step left to go, and that step is to put the quilt label on. So I know what I want to put on it. Yeah, I think we're going to put that right in the center when it's all said and done. Instead of putting it right dead center, we're going to bring it down about halfway. Let me finish marking this so I know where all my lines are. And I can see the lines. I don't know if you can see that. I can see the lettering through the material well enough that I'm going to go ahead and just use that, and I'm not even going to use my disappearing ink pen. That way I don't have to add any water or anything to it, and I can iron it after I've done it and set that ink down into it. There we go. And you can see I'm working outward from my center line. There we go. That is done. Let's exaggerate that line just a little bit. I'm really happy with that. I like that. It's relatively centered in there. I think that's good. So let's unpin this. I'm going to remove this inner basting. And I'm not going to remove the other basting till I actually stitch it down to the piece. I've done this such that this really has no right way up or down or sideways. So I am just going to put it on. So 27 inches. Oh, that's going to be 13.5 is my center. So let's mark that. And then this, it's about 13.5. So that's going to be 7.25. And so now I know roughly where my centers are. Let's just double check this one. Yeah. All right, pinned on. That does not look centered, does it? 13.5. Oh yeah, we're way off. Why, how did we do that? All right, let's try it again, folks. Am I measuring wrong? It's 6 3/4. So learn your math, folks. Let's figure this out again. 6 3/4 is center, not 7.25. Let's try this one more time, folks. That looks better. This is a beading thread. I think that's our color. And so we're just going to whip stitch around. Again, I'm just trying to catch a thread or two of the hexagons on top. And once I get well secured enough, I'll take the pin out. I debated using an embroidery stitch, but I decided against it as I really would like to just have the hexagons showing up for themselves. And I'm using my fingers on the back to make sure I'm not going all the way through. So I'm just stitching into the backing and lining fabrics and not going through to the face fabrics on the front. Make sure it's laying flat, which it is. All right, well, let me get this stitched down and I'll see you in a few minutes with a finished black pearl project. This is stitched on. It didn't take me very long at all. And now I'm ready to go in and remove my basting stitches. Oh, this is so satisfying. You know, when you get to that point in a project, and I've had time as I've been stitching these last bits by hand to think about this project and where it began. Oh, it's just one of my favorite parts of a project, to see it through to completion. Oh my gosh, we're done. We're done. I am so pleased with this project. It has turned out every bit as good as I had hoped, and it just makes my heart glad to see it finished. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. One of the problems when you're stitching with cats is they like sitting on your work. I'm also realizing that stitching in a black shirt with a white cat around probably isn't the best solution to remaining fuzz-free. I'm absolutely covered in cat hair.